Awesome. Can everyone hear me okay? Mic's working? Beautiful. Thank you, Professor Smallwood, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's really hard to get out with daylight savings, but the fact that Kane Hall is packed right now, I think is a testament to the sense of community and honors. So I'm really excited to be your student moderator for the evening. I'll kind of kick off my role by firstly introducing myself and then talking a little bit more about our conversation, what we hope to accomplish tonight. So formal introduction, my name is Jaya. I'm a third year in the honors program, and I'm double majoring in international studies and law, societies, and justice with a minor in human rights, which is kind of a long-winded way of saying I'm in the social sciences, and I'm interested in kind of how legal systems impact people. I'm also importantly a student researcher, so I'll kind of, hoping to get a little more into the weeds of that throughout our conversation, but I'll preview that by saying that I hold a position researching in the European Studies Department under the chair of the department, Sabine Lang. I've also been involved in the honors program in a few different capacities. So last year I was a peer educator for the program. This year I'm a peer mentor. Shout out to my peer mentees who are over there. So both of those positions worked directly with students in their first quarter of the honors program. And so I'm really excited to be here today in front of all of you. Doing an event where ultimately the audience is students in Honors 100. And so for those of you that are enrolled in that class now, your instructor Lillian asked all of you to respond to a survey where you read that the topic of our conversation was public research universities. And you were asked to kind of share your initial thoughts or questions that came up when you read that topic. And so all of us in planning this event today have read all of that feedback. And it's very much, shaped the things that we're hoping to bring up today. So yeah, I just want to reiterate that student input has very much provided a framework with which we will have our conversation. So along that line, kind of our goal here today, as Professor Smallwood said, not only is to model what it's like to have an interdisciplinary conversation about these kind of big, complex issues, but a lot of you are probably already grappling with what this topic is. Maybe you even chose the university because it's a public research university. And so we kind of hope that all of you walk away from this conversation tonight with a better understanding of what your role is at the university. And if you are interested in pursuing research, hopefully you kind of have some tangible next steps and know what to do with that information if that's something you're looking to get involved with. Now that I've given my little spiel, I'm going to hand it off to our speakers to introduce themselves. And once we do that, we'll get into our first prompt of the night.
Me first? Me first. Hi. As Stephanie said, I'm Joe James. I'm an associate professor in the information school. We had a list of things here that we were asked to talk about. So I'm in the information school, which if you're not in the information school, people are like, isn't every school an information school? Like, what do you do? So I'm an information scientist by training, also a librarian by training. My particular interest is on the history and cultural impact of documents and documentary forms and information objects and so on, and the stories that they tell us about not only themselves, but also the societies that gave rise to them and the people who created them and the reasons they were created, and the work they continue to do now, which can be quite different than the work they were intended to do. I can tell you the room I was sitting in. I can tell you where I was sitting. I can tell you who was talking. The first time I ever heard anybody say, the life of the mind. And that was the moment that I knew I could think for a living. And I didn't actually have to get a job. And I am one of those people who went to college and never left. I'm still here. It's the only thing I'm any good at. And I'm enormously grateful for that moment where I can live from the neck up. I can live the life of the mind, which has enriched me and my life ever since. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was hearing that phrase. I found information science. Actually, somebody pointed me in the right direction to find information science when I was totally failing out of my first class in computer science. Thank God. And it just spoke to me. It just meant something to me in ways that I couldn't describe and still can't. And years later, it still does. And it's a tremendous gift. And I'm delighted to be here and be part of this conversation.
All right, is that me now? Okay. So I am Megan McCloskey, and I am a lawyer. I practiced law in Seattle for about 10 years, and I'm also a very, very small business owner. I have a small, you're looking at her, consulting firm, for which I have done consulting projects for a number of different UN entities, UN Population Fund, UNDP, UN HCR, UNESCO, and a variety of others on issues that I care a lot about. The work that I do is focused very much on human rights in general, women's rights in particular, and the rights of older women and women with disabilities in even more micro detail. So on top of all of those things, I am also a student. I am at the law school. We're finishing a PhD, I swear I'm going to finish the PhD. And it is not it's not a natural thing to do a PhD at the law school, right? And don't do it. I mean, sorry. No, sorry. No, teary, like my bad, but do it, but think about it. I did it because I actually didn't want to take the GRE, and so that's why I'm at the law school. But it gives me an opportunity to focus on the application of human rights law in practice. And so it's something that I feel as I said, I feel very strongly about. I know one of the things we were supposed to talk about is kind of when we knew. I will tell you when I figure out what I want to be. We'll leave it at that.
You're both so modest in your introduction, because I know some things about both of you, but Joe, if I can, I know we haven't started this is like keep this simple, Ed, but Joe and I spend time together in large audiences because Joe convenes our campus when it comes to convocation and graduation and commencement. So I'm Ed Taylor. I have a title of Dean and Vice Provost of Undergraduate Academic Affairs. So some of my colleagues do a lot of important work for students, and particularly focused on undergraduate students in our unit. Mostly the work of my colleagues who are really, really gifted at what they do. And so I'm grateful to work with them and for them. And Meg, so Joe, there's so much you do that sort of brings community together that I just admire. And Megan, when you walked in the room, you had a gaggle of students come to you because there's so much teaching and community engagement that you do that's just so inspiring. And I hope to be that kind of teacher as I carry on. Something I want to mention, Joe, that you and I have in common, because when Stephanie asked me to be on a panel, I sort of hesitated a little bit, and I think that hesitation almost came off as, I'm hesitant to do it. But what struck me was the invitation to come before a project on the public research university, as austere as it is, sponsored by the honors program. And what struck me was I'm a first generation student. And all of this remains new for me, no matter how many years I've been doing it. It all stays pretty novel and new to me. And the other thing that I think this sort of jumped out at me was that it really wasn't that long ago in this country that we wouldn't have a panel like this, that we wouldn't have it together. I wouldn't be sitting on it. And the fact of the matter, if it was 1960 or 1959, there would be riots associated with the possibility that we'd be sitting in a panel like this. So my hesitation was a pause and just a reflection on the power of the moment that to ask us to speak to this. And I'm gonna say something else that was really, when I walked in the room, I saw my bio up there. It was flashing, and it wasn't what was in the bio. It's what wasn't in the bio for me, because I made a choice not long ago to omit some things from what I'd been writing in my own research. And one of those things that I chose to omit was work I've done on critical race theory. And I intentionally omitted that because of the moment and time. And so as we speak to the public research university and the public part of this and the research part of it, I'd love for us to engage around that which emboldens us and that which in this moment frightens us as well, without getting into the politics, because this is I think, an important part of our conversation.
Great. Thank you all for your insights. You brought up something that I think we'll get into later, which is the fact that many of us sitting here, our majors are currently being called into question, our fields of study. So that's an important thing that I hope we come back to. Kind of along that line. So As I said, we asked all of the honors 100 students to respond to the prompt, what first comes to mind when you hear public research university. So if all of you could tell us what comes to mind and maybe something that you're hoping we talk about this evening.
When we first had a conversation about this as a topic, I frankly was very excited about it because the thing that comes to my mind is research that is for the public good. And the reason that matters in this world that we're living in is because so many organizations that are out there doing the work are doing the work, and they don't have the capacity to evaluate. They don't have the capacity to do needs assessments. They don't have the capacity to gather data. They can't tell if the work is working. They don't know what's effective and what isn't effective, what strategies are stronger and not so strong. Every time I'm talking to, somebody at the UN or at an international NGO, the thing I hear over and over and over again, well, we don't have the data. There's no data on women with disabilities. There's no data on older women. There's no data on children with disabilities. We don't know how many women with disabilities are experiencing violence. There's no data, no data, no data. And from my standpoint, I think it is such an important, we have this fantastic institution, facility, resource here that it has been an enormous, from my point of view, privilege to be able to offer us to them and say, what do you need? Tell me what you need. Let's do a project together. And I've had a group that I worked with over the winter, spring, who we worked on a project for UNHCR, the High Commissioner on Refugees, to assess barriers to asylum seekers with disabilities. I've worked on another project with a group of students here for UNESCO on gathering information about school violence and bullying against young learners with disabilities. That was turned into a change in their policy. I worked on a project with the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. She's a UN officer, I'll call her. And if you want to know more details about what a Special Rapporteur is, take my class. But in any event, we did an assessment of disability inclusion within the United Nations as a whole, within the system as a whole. That's looking at how UN Women, UNICEF, UNESCO, UNDP incorporate people with disabilities as employees, as beneficiaries of their programs, within their policies, within their strategy making, and so on. Within 6 months of us completing our report on that project, the UN adopted a disability inclusion strategy that has been in place since 2019. So for me, I think that we sit in a really amazing place of privilege that offers so much, or that allows us to offer so much for others.
Ed's telling me to talk. I learned long ago when Ed says to talk, you should talk. What's a public research university? This is a public research university. This right here, this room right here. Look around. Look at the people in this room. There's a couple of my students in the room who know how my reaction when those things happen. So this is a public research university. This gathering of people talking about this topic in this kind of place, this is a public research university. This whole place and other places like it, this ginormous machine that creates knowledge and distributes knowledge and stores knowledge and occasionally hides knowledge and occasionally overlooks knowledge and forgets knowledge and all of that. That's a public research university. Each of those three words is equally important. And they're not inevitable and they're not guaranteed. It didn't have to happen. Public research universities, as we know them, did not have to happen. There are not a lot of other places in the world where it did happen, where it has happened, and they're not guaranteed. There is no guarantee that universities like this will go on for 50 or 100 years. I'm not saying they're not gonna, I'm not saying it's imminent, but it's easy to take for granted. Oh, you know, we all talk about the big flagship research universities, the ones we call our peers. We could all name them off, right? Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, Virginia, UCLA, Berkeley, those kinds of places. Yeah, you got to fight for them. And it's the doing of it every day. It's the work that we do. It's the classes we teach. It's the projects we run. It's the people we work with. It's the communities and organizations and institutions that we affect. It's the people we affect. It's the people we work with. It's the people we try to help. And particularly in an institution like this, it includes the clinical enterprise as well, the medical clinical enterprise, health science enterprise. Yeah, and I was joking with, where's Jason? I was joking with Jason. Right. I mean, I've been here forever. You've been here forever. And you're still finding things like, wait, we do that? I mean, we have an office for that. We have people who do that. Like, 25 years I've been here. Like, we have a thing for that? Yeah. It's every time you think you have your arms around it, something else comes in.
Joe, you triggered something for me that I think you're speaking to not taking this for granted. And one of the things I think it's worth noting is how relatively new the concept is, all things considered. And in some ways, as I'm thinking about this, there's a meta narrative I'm doing. In some ways, the public research university is not unlike our democracy, that the fragility of that enterprise enters into this. But in the early 19th century, there weren't that many colleges. There were a handful of them. They did very specific things, and they were private, and they served a very specific population of men to do very specific things. And you see after the Morrill Act in, I think, 1862, Joe, you see the expansion of these universities, some of them land grant institutions, which we should mention. The land came from land occupied by Native Americans given back to a nation to create land grant institutions. So when we often do the land acknowledgements, they aren't just performative, but they're it's a sacred statement in a way. It's a recognition in it, and it's a recognition. But then you see the emergence of these public research universities in the 19th century that do really important and significant things in our nation. But you don't see the advent of women getting access to this, and you don't see access to them until we get into the 1960s, really. We even went so far as to create historically Black institutions, separate institutions. So these images of people like James Meredith sitting alone in Mississippi and Alabama, Governor George Wallace standing in front of the steps, segregation now and segregation forever. Some of this in my lifetime. So this is the newness of this project for me is really pretty significant, I think, to our conversation. So when we think about access and who's in the room and who gets access, that's a really important part of the conversation of what a public institution does. So publicly accessible, and to whom, not to be taken for granted. The notion of the public good is really important to this. Public accountability is something that, for me in my role, when students are protesting on Red Square historically, whether it's about investments in apartheid or whether it's about a Vietnam War or whatever the issue is, it's public accountability. And so that public part of it is really, really important and a privilege, as hard as it is, to not be able to close the gates on that conversation. So the public accountability part of it is really, really important and significant. So I see in some ways the parallels between the work we do at a university, the newness of this concept. One would argue that as long as we think this democracy has been here, the fragility of that concept and how new that concept is. If you argue that full participation, at least the right to vote, for some didn't happen until the 1920s, for some didn't happen until the 1960s. So for me, just keeping in mind how precious this is, and how relatively new it is, and how we need to hold these tensions lest we neglect the very thing that is so significant and important to this enterprise.
And I'm going to pick up on your phrase about the public good, because you beat me to it. The public good has seen better days. The concept of the public good, that we as a community, we as a society, we as a country, as a city, as a state, as a commonweal, can come together and help to create institutions that everybody benefits from, even if you don't benefit from them yourself. Ask the people who work in public libraries. Ask the people who work in public schools. Support for these institutions, which used to be a complete given. Everybody thinks the public library is a great idea. Yeah. Book bannings are up 300%, by the way, all across the country, including in the state. Just, yeah, right. And threats to intellectual freedom all over the place. Public schools. It just goes on and on and on the list. These institutions that have built this society, that communities. The University of Washington is founded when Seattle has 200 people in it, downtown. Okay, it wasn't much of a university for the first 20 years or so, but we gloss over that part of the history, and until we get to the first graduates in the 1880s. But it was a commitment on the part of the people who lived here. Like, this is a part of what it means to be, American, and the concept of the public good is worth fighting for, among other things.
Can I add something else to what both of you have said? The research part of it, we talked about the public good part of it, the research part of it. Because in some ways we take great pride in this multi-billion-dollar enterprise that is the research university. And I don't think it's safe to make the assumption that the research that we do, and here's that accountability comes in, is for the public good. And we have to hold that tension for each other. And in some ways we make some assumptions about the objectivity of that research. And I think it's important for us and for our students to keep in mind the subjectivity of the research itself. And Joe, when you did a project some years ago, Documents That Changed the World, and I was teaching from those documents because I thought they were really it was an important teaching tool for me. And you were using things like the national anthem and the Constitution and documents that were significant, letter from a Birmingham jail. And I was using those documents, and as I was teaching, I had to make mention of the fact that Professor James chose these documents and made declarations about the importance of these documents. And when we think about what it means to choose and make a statement about what's important or what changes the world, it's important to recognize the subjectivity of that we are making choices about them. And Megan, for you, the reason I sort of stepped into critical race theory, never expecting that in this very narrow body of work that comes out of critical legal studies. It comes out of a legal studies and a very narrow sliver of critical legal studies, Derek Bell and others. Very narrow conversation. Never did I imagine it would be used as a prop to talk about critical race theory being taught in elementary schools to children, to taught to hate their race. I mean, it's strange to think about this, but that body of work came about because this critique that the law, that making of law may be as subjective as anything. It's not objective. So your engagement and your activity, your critical work actually seems to come from a place that the law itself is not solely objective. So that notion of research, I think holding, and we can talk about this when we get into interdisciplinary research, holding that tension in the research that we do and being clear and public about that and being publicly accountable in our work and our research as well. And includes legal research.
Great. Thank you all for bringing up those points. I think that all of those things were kind of weighing very heavy on people's minds when they responded to the survey, the kind of theme of like research should be done for the public good and there should be a sense of accountability and it should, contribute to the betterment of society. And so I appreciate you all kind of starting to touch on those themes. You segued very well into the next question. We are the Interdisciplinary Honors Program. And so I want to ask you all, what do interdisciplinary approaches to kind of the hands-on aspect of what you're doing, the teaching, the learning, the research, what does that contribute to the role of the public research university?
You go first. I'm making this way too complicated. I'm waiting.
Is this on? Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a really it's a really interesting question, and it's a very I don't know how many lawyers there are in the room, but it is not the kind of thing that you get asked or you get it gets discussed in law schools. That is for sure. It is when you are in law school, you learn how to be a lawyer, and this is definitely the case in the United States. If you're going to pursue a JD, you are learning how to practice law. And you are not learning to question whether the way that you practice law or whether the law itself is actually serving anyone, much less your clients, communities, people who are marginalized, whomever that may be. And so I think I would love to see more interdisciplinarity from the law, kind of within the law school, a little blending with the main campus in a way, because I think it is absolutely essential. And there are all those scholars. I mean, it's the critical race theorists, it's a feminist legal theorist, it's disability legal theorists, and so on, who have said, wait a minute, I understand that there's law here, and I understand that this is potentially important, maybe even emancipatory, but it isn't working for me. And there's a whole lot of reasons it isn't working for me. And that comes from sociology a lot of times. That comes from people who are doing anthropology research. That comes from people who are doing cultural studies. That comes from people who are doing history. I mean, gosh, legal history is an amazing subject area, very, super, super interesting. It comes from people who do international studies, international work. And I think I am still a believer in the law. I believe it is necessary, but it is not sufficient to make the kind of change that I would like to see in the world. And so I think having an interdisciplinary lens can really sort of help us flesh out why not and how we can do it better.
So interdisciplinarity, particularly for those of you who are, first quarter students, this word may just sort of land with a dull thud, like you don't actually know what it means yet. And I can resonate with that because I don't know any better. So I was raised in an information school, almost literally, and have lived in information schools ever since. And for the faculty in the room, this will mean something. I've talked to Stephanie about this. I've never been in a department. I don't even know what that looks like because information science is inherently an interdisciplinary field. I've 70-ish, depending on how you count them, colleagues in the iSchool. We have at least 35 or 40 different doctoral degrees. So if you think you've been to Vicky's been to faculty meetings and you're all more or less geographers, so you at least know what the words mean. We have lots of discussions like, what's a system? Because it means something different if you're a computer scientist or if you're a business person. So what I've learned, so A, I don't know any better, and B, what I've learned from spending my entire life in these intentionally interdisciplinary worlds is nobody has a monopoly on the right way to think about stuff. And if you live in a world where we have, computer scientists and designers and data scientists, but we also have educators, we have an art historian, we have a painter, we have somebody who has a MFA in fine painting, who now does work on autism. I can't connect the dots there. We have a philosopher because it's kind of funny to have a philosopher. He's kind of a nut. We have a mathematical sociologist. I didn't know there was such a thing as a mathematical sociologist. And she doesn't fit anywhere. The sociologists think she's a mathematician. The mathematicians think she's a sociologist. So she comes to an iSchool. She's happy as a clam, right? So we know that none of us knows everything. We know that none of us is right and that we're all right and that there's no one answer. There's never one answer. There is often one answer, but if somebody's telling you there's one answer, they're telling you that for a reason. It's because they're hiding the other three, or they don't want you to look very far, or they have the answer and that's what they want you to think is the answer, and that's all there is to it. And when you live in an interdisciplinary environment, and when you see the world from 360 degrees, or as many degrees as you can, you rapidly figure out there is no right answer. Nobody's got a monopoly. And it's only when you put the pieces together, you get the sociologists and the anthropologists and the lawyers and the demographers and the and the public affairs people and the political scientists and the economists and maybe a few humanists, you know, for a good measure. Now you got something. Now you're seeing the world as it really is from all those disciplinary perspectives. I'm like, oh yeah, that's why. Oh, maybe that's not going to work because, yeah. And it's way harder and it's way more frustrating and it's incredibly more satisfying. And right.
And this is such an important question and so relevant to honors. Because some of our students and our schools and colleges are organized around disciplines, and those disciplines have a purpose, which is to learn about our respective professions, to learn methodologies, to seek the truth, to develop the skills and knowledge to really go deep in a place, whether it's chemistry or geography or history. And there's something important to the discipline itself. And I learned that the hard way through thinking I was doing some historical research at times and making mistakes that were irresponsible kind of mistakes that had me really respecting the rigor that is so important to doing deep and incisive analysis in a field. And for the faculty that are here, they're measured ultimately, they're assessed ultimately on their impact in their respective disciplines. So I had to come to terms with the importance of a discipline itself. So I'm cautious at times when jumping straight to interdisciplinary without really understanding and recognizing the importance of disciplines themselves. And yet I'm in the College of Education. I'm a professor in the College of Education, and some of my colleagues, and Jason Johnson's here. And there are really important questions that I found myself trying to understand that were deeply personal for me, which had to do with, and this should be relevant to every student that's in here also, because I often ask students, my first question is, where'd you come from? What school did you come from? Because I got interested in how people make their way to post-secondary education, and how people make their way to access and all of this, and what some of the explanations are for those who make it and those who end up doing other kinds of things, and what are the explanations? I came from a working class school, and I didn't know it was working class until I got to a liberal arts university and realized I'm in a seminar with 15 people, and I had taken foods and wood shop. I had taken practical classes throughout my education by teachers who were just barely adequate. I asked my math teacher, I said, I think I'm going to college, and I think I need more time with you before I go to college. And he looked at me and he said, I'm the wrestling coach, right? You're asking the wrong dude. And when I got to Gonzaga, and I was handed a statistics, but I took 21 credits. I took stats, I took biology, and I took theology. And I was handed Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Letters and Papers from Prison. And what exposed me was I had never been asked to at that point in my life to read an entire text. And everybody in the room had, pages flipped, and they had sticky notes and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, so what's the explanation for this? How do you get different kinds of schooling for different types of people? Is that intentional? Is that by design? I found myself even going a little bit deeper when I started into this field and trying to look at sort of the research of why is it some kids do better in schools and some do not? And what are some explanations in the research? And so there are bodies of research that go back to the 18th century that make really powerful testaments under the guise of research that, some people are smarter than others. It's genetic, craniology. You can actually make the case that some people are genetically smarter than others. You can go further with that. If these people don't have the ability to learn, they shouldn't be subject to schooling. In fact, we hold up questions about whether or not they're even human. Maybe they're more like animals than they are human beings. Think about the intersection between research and how publics engage, and even how democracies engage. Bodies of research about that. And as absurd as you think that is, then there's decades of research that go, that's wrong. That science is wrong. The problem is actually, it's embedded in cultures. It has to do with how people live together. It's a culture of poverty. It gets passed down. It operates within communities. And then you have public policy efforts in the 1960s, programs, culture of poverty programs, putting on poverty. Then there's a body of research that say, actually the problem isn't embedded in cultures. It's actually structures. Schools are structured certain ways. You've tracked certain kids. You've created these, and so there's bodies of research in education that make these claims. And the case for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary is in some ways to hold disciplines accountable to each other, to provide alternative explanations for a phenomenon. And just when you think we've held that tension, I came to graduate school at the University of Washington in 1998, 99. And I could walk through the bookstore. Some students won't have the benefit of walking through bookstores and seeing books, because you could walk through and you can see what other people are learning. The two books that were most prominent to me, one, there was a set of books where people were debating affirmative action, debates on affirmative action. And the other book that was prominent at the time were books by two researchers, Hernston and Murray, about intelligence. So we go back to that 18th century research again. And so here you have in 1998, 99, a psychologist and a political scientist going back and looking at explanations for why some people perform better than others. And they go right back to the intelligence argument. They go right back to the hereditary argument. Thank goodness for actually people like Claude Steele, who called out work, social psychological work, that called out the power of that kind of, and for me personally, what it was like to go to school in the context to know that in some classes nearby, in Kane Hall, in Smith Hall, people were debating the presence of people like me, and maybe even the intelligence of people like me, and the stereotype threat and the power. So the importance of different types of research, to include phenomenological research that ask, what's the position of the knower and the researcher in the first place? How did you get there? And how do you get back to that question of subjectivity? Because how did you come to the place they asked the question under the guise of research in the first place? So then you can bring in Husserl and Heidegger and others that impose powerful questions. So those disciplines are important, but the transdisciplinary tension is really important to include philosophy, to include humanities, artistic expression of it all. And those tensions are really, really important too. And there's that discipline, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary tension that's necessary to hold. Because out of our research then comes things like public policy and designing of cities. There are real consequences for the work that we do. So there's that public accountability piece again, the importance of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, but the importance of holding that tension and looking at multiple explanations based on the evidence and debating those theories in our own space is really important to what it means to be a public research university again.
And I'm going to say this with some hesitation. Interdisciplinarity is not a panacea. So Alfred Binet, turn of the 20th century, researching intelligence, which the current theory at the time is intelligence is an innate thing. It's not a developmental thing, it's an innate thing. The emerging field of statistics is rising in the late 19th century and developing a variety of techniques for creating and analyzing statistical data. You put Alfred Binet and statistical research together, you get the IQ test, which then morphs into the standardized test, the SAT and the GRE, and which you mercifully avoided, and that gets baked into the society for 100 years, and it's still there. So just because you have two disciplines doesn't mean it's going to work.
True, right? And you invoke something else. Do you mind if we talk to each other for a minute? Because I want to come back to you. So
I know. Can I just want to make a suggestion? Can we do like a reading list off of this? Oh, I want to read that. Okay, sorry. Just,
I love that you took the GRE, and I love that you did well on the GRE, because you didn't do it, because I took the GRE exams. I thought, okay,
LSAT's even worse, but
yeah,
right.
yeah. Or the LSAT. But let's talk about the LSAT for a minute. So, so legal knowledge, what our rights are as citizens, what our First Amendment rights are. Can I walk in here and wear a Jesus Saves t-shirt? Can it be in big letters? Can I wear a big cross? Can I? What are the First Amendment rights? What are my rights as a citizen? What can I say? Can I convene with groups that I want to convene with? So I have a right to say what I want to say. And law just pervades all of our lives. And the importance of understanding our rights as a citizen is so important. But yet to get into law school, you got to take the LSAT, and the community of people who get into law school gets small. You get this, I'm going to use language that we try to avoid using in honors. You get really the brightest, the people we want those high LSAT scores, and we want high. And so you get a narrow community of people. And then it gets even more narrow because you rank within law school. And so you get a narrow body of people. And then you have even more narrow people who get to work and clerk and then you get jobs on Wall Street or wherever, clerkships and such. And then you've got a very, very small percentage of people who hold the keys to law in this society, but yet it impacts the majority of us, all of our lives. And there's that accessibility and that tension again between who should have access to a body of knowledge and what does it mean when institutions become, especially public institutions, become more and more elite and who gets access. And I've had to check myself on more than a few occasions. And Joe, we were in rooms together when it wasn't long ago that I used to stand up at new student convocation and celebrate the grade point average of the incoming class. I mean, even as I say that, you should be looking at me going, I can't believe you're a college student. I used to celebrate the
He made
grade
it
point.
funny. He made it funny.
I made it
He
funny.
made it funny.
And I added a caveat at the end,
Entertaining.
but nobody heard the caveat because they were laughing so hard at the other stuff. But I would hold up the grade point average. I'd say your class is 3.89. Last year's class was 3.79. And I'd hold up the test scores and say, these are your test scores. Aren't you a wonderful, amazing collection of people? And I've stopped doing that because that is not anything to glorify for a public institution. Guess what? You made it in. And who are the rest of the people that didn't make it in? Well, they actually aren't that smart, perhaps, right? And so in some ways, I'm reifying the very thing that I'm harping against, which is how do we think about the public research university and the knowledge that's so important to our functioning in a society? How do we think about that as truly for the public and for the public good? And law school is one of those such examples because I would argue that everyone in here ought to have some basic understanding of the law, whether they take the LSAT or not. That wasn't really a question to you to put you in pressure on you. But what you're doing is so important and so valuable that citizens ought to be activated to be able to do rights of those with disabilities. But that means having access to knowledge.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting, I mean, it's a really interesting point. I used to oh gosh, this was a long time ago when I was practicing. I was on the board of the King County Bar Foundation, and we had a project on the future of the Law Institute. And what we were doing is we were reaching out and working with high school students and encouraging them to apply to law school. And we were only working with the public high schools in kind of King County area. And what was so surprising about that project was how difficult it was to get into the public high schools. You know, we were offering scholarships, we were offering encounters. They did a mock trial. They met with Supreme Court, Washington State Supreme Court justices, and a variety of different things, and had mentors, internship opportunities. But it was really, really difficult to get into the high schools, and so it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's on the one hand, there's the all of the different gatekeepers, the gatekeeper functions that happen in that test taking, grades, et cetera, et cetera. And I have had so many different conversations with students that are like, they have, and I know this is probably some of you in here, have this perfectly diagrammed assessment of, well, if I have this LSAT score and I have this GPA and I have these, extracurricular, blah, 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 these are the 5 schools that I can get into. I definitely understand urge, the impetus to do it that way because it makes a lot of sense. It's expensive to apply, etc. But it's like you're in so many different ways. You're kind of closing yourself. You're sort of closing yourself off, and so it kind of goes both ways. In other words, like the schools do it, we do it. We sort of self-select in certain ways. And it has pretty profound impacts in what the law looks like. Not only, I mean, really what it is. There's a wonderful, frustrating, horrible story about an argument in front of the U.S. Supreme Court when Justice Ginsburg was on the bench, and she was at that time the only woman, and the case involved a 13-year-old young woman who had been strip searched by her high school on the assumption that somebody had accused her of having an Advil. And there was some assumption that she was a drug dealer. And so she was stripped down to her underwear. The administrator went inside her underwear, and she had that experience. Needless to say, her parents were horrified. She was horrified. They pursued a claim against the school. It went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And during the oral arguments, I think it was Justice Breyer, who was a lovely guy. However, in this instance, he was like, oh, well, it's a locker room, whatever. You take your clothes off in the locker room. And Justice Ginsburg, to her credit, her head exploded. And she let fly about the reality of being a 13-year-old girl. He wisely backed down. The court ultimately found for the child and her family. And you have to ask yourself, what would have happened had she not been there, right? Had she not been there on that court? How many times is that happening on a regular basis? I'm teaching a class on disability legal studies right now. We were just going through the statistics on the number of lawyers with disabilities, the number of judges with disabilities. There's literature on juries where people with disabilities are being excluded from juries, right? So members of the public can't even get into that kind of role because of certain kind of gatekeeping functions and so on. And so, I mean, it's such an interesting and important point on this elitism. And I don't know how to kind of, where do we work around? How do we contest that, challenge that?
I know you want to ask another question. So I'm gonna make reference to a challenge that I received when I came here, and when I started to become, my first year as a faculty member in the College of Education. I must admit I did have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I was studying with some people that were really top in the field, John Goodlad and Ken Saratnik, who was a statistician turned critical inquiry person, sort of cut across disciplines. And then the third part of their trio was a guy named Roger Soder. We take Roger's classes. And Roger was someone, I don't know what his degree is. I don't think he has a doctoral degree. And Roger I met, and he started a conversation with me about, I think I asked him about something about kind of power issues in faculty meetings. And he goes, yes, much like the Melian dialogue. I go, what? He said, the Melian dialogue, the debate between the Melos and the Melian, the Melians, the island of Melos. I have no idea what you're talking about. He goes, well, it's page 275, in Thucydides. You're really talking about,
of course.
So I happen to have it in my back pocket. So he's talking to me as if I've not just read Thucydides, but I've read into Thucydides, and I've taken this section of the Melians, and I understand the dialogue that took place and its implications for power in my own work. And I went, this guy's a trip, but I actually went and I bought Thucydides, and I read the Peloponnesian War. And then I was walking down the hall, and I said, wow, Roger, these terrible faculty meetings, people are fighting constantly, this conflict. And he says, come here. And he reaches up on his top shelf and he pulls out Kant's Conflict of the Faculties. and turns into pages of Kant. And it's 45 minutes, and people who know Roger, and I'm 45 minutes in this Kant, like, you think I just have Kant on my, and he did. And I there was something about just sort of people in meetings and not telling the truth. He goes, well, you've read Moliere, haven't you? And I go, what? And he said, you got to read Moliere. And so I would walk by Roger, and at some point I started intentionally walking toward him and sitting with him, going, this is what being in a public research university. I mean, he keeps offering me stuff and saying, have you read that? And not because he's trying to sort of pull some intellectual rank. He's just saying, this is stuff that gives me passion, and it has relevance to what you're talking about. And let's have a conversation about this. And then he's like, because like in The Godfather. And I was like, I don't watch The Godfather. He's like, so I'd go back and watch The Godfather just to be in conversation with him. And this power of being in this place where you can actually bring these bodies to work together. And when you find people who exemplify this and who are passionate about it, and they're all over the place, this place comes alive for you. It just comes alive. And for someone who's a first generation, to have somebody treat you that way, just the assumption that you belong in this at the highest level that you can go, whatever that high, you just keep bouncing and going higher. And the more I bounce, you like, and so you've read this, haven't you? And I go, no, I haven't, but just bring it to me. But I just started avoiding him if I just wanted to have lunch. I'm like,
We'll let you
I don't
ask
know
your
what
question in a
prompted
second. This happened to me in the class like a week ago. Somehow we got onto the 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast. Don't ask why. And I'm putting up newspaper headlines from the time and videos and stuff. And I had a student in the back of the room like, how did you find all this stuff? And I said, dude, I've been at this for a long time. And I'm a librarian. Like, I could find anything. And it's like planets forming. It just coalesces in your head. And that's what a place like this is like, is this connects to that, connects to that, connects to that. How did we get to Thucydides? I suppose everything gets back to Herodotus one way or another, but now I'm just showing off. But yeah, it's all here. And you just wander around and you run into people who can spout Kant off the top of their head. God help them, You should ask us a question.
Hey, I will. Thank you. I think Megan's right. I think we're gonna need a reading list, and maybe a Godfather movie night could be good as well.
Oh,
Just,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Next honors event could be
Godfather.
good. Okay, so Ed kind of brought up how we've conceptualized and reconceptualized research throughout the past couple of decades. And so I want to ask all of you, what counts as research in public research universities? And I know a lot of students start college, myself included, thinking that research means being in a lab with a white coat on, Bunsen burners, like pouring chemicals, and don't kind of know what qualitative research is. And so if all of you could speak to what counts as research, and if you could bring in your own personal research, that'd be great. I would love to hear more about that.
I have a quick qualitative research story.
Please.
You're getting tired of my stories already. I am. So I decided when I was doing my own research here as a graduate student, and when I finished, I actually thought, I want to go back and continue doing research methodology classes. And so there was a sociologist named Howie Becker, who I know was a really, really good qualitative researcher. So I decided to go sit in on one of his classes and just audit his class, even though I was already starting as a faculty member. And so I go into this class, and it's a seminar of about 20 students, most of whom were undergraduates. And everybody's just kind of sitting there. And there's a guy with long hair, and he's just sitting and he's eating Oreos, right? He's eating. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, who's the teacher in this class? I couldn't figure out, is the guy eating the Oreos, or is it this young guy over here? And so at some point, class is at 2:00 and 2:15. He says, so let's start. And so the guy eating the Oreos is Howie Becker. He's the professor. So he says, so would you mind going around and telling me what your research project is? And the first student, he's a freshman. He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a research project. And he goes, okay, where do you live? And the student said, well, McMahon. What's a day like in McMahon? And the kid starts to describe what it's like. And he goes, yeah, I go sit in the lobby. And what happens in the lobby? Well, this kid comes and he plays the piano. He plays really lovely as he can play. And then a bunch of people sit around, and sometimes they sing. And he says, really, they sing in the residence hall? He goes, yeah. And then what happens? And he describes, people come and eat, and people sit in different groups. And he says, so this happens every day? And he goes, yeah. And so Howie says, so what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to sit on the floor in front of the piano, and I want you to see if it happens again. But this time bring a notepad. I want you to sort of make notes of what's happening in that residence hall, who comes and who shows up and who plays the piano and who sings, and just make notes of what it is you think you're seeing. And in a 5-minute conversation, he's laying out sort of naturalistic inquiry, that you are actually doing research as you walk around. You are taking in your environment, and you're seeing patterns. You're on a college campus, you're in a residence hall. And you can see him, and then he goes to the next person who's ready for him now. He goes, I live in, and this is what happens. And person by person, and he says, take a notebook and sit down. And he's teaching them to be ethnographers, to see and to smell, to use your senses. And so one of the things I would say about this project of being here is the way of seeing and the way of being as you move around this place, given the university's mission, the preservation of knowledge, the prospect of learning and distribution of knowledge, that we're in it all the time. And to take that in and begin to actually see that as having its own form of rigor and observation, and to begin to actually hold that. I thought it was a really powerful way of teaching, because Howie didn't say anything other than ask questions, right? And then invite people to actually go back in their environment and pay attention, which I thought was a powerful methodology unto itself, is my qualitative story.
All right, I'll go. I love that story, actually, and that is a great story, and I am mentally making a note for our next project together on how we're going to do that. But you make me feel so much better, because my initial reaction to this question was like, God, I think I'm a shit. Oh, excuse me. I'm a crap. I'm a horrible researcher. I mean, I kind of feel like I don't do it well, because hence I'm still finishing the PhD. But
Finishing.
I love talking to people. I mean, I love talking to people, and I did a project with a guy who had finished his PhD. I guess it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, whatever. We were doing interviews that I had set up with people I knew, and we had a semi-structured interview guide, which if you go in this direction, you will know what that means. I'm very heavy on the semi, and he was wildly heavy on the structure side. And I was just like, we were just having these conversations and talking and everything. And he was like, dude, like, follow the script. And I'm like, yeah, it's a really good point, because I'm actually not going to have much to compare, right? If this is what the point is. See, I'm a terrible researcher.
No, you're you're an ethnographer.
I just love getting stories.
You're a holistic researcher.
All right, this is like my therapy. Thank you all for coming. Yeah.
This is why I don't do holistic research, because I would suck at it. I want numbers. Tell me to count something.
See, we need to work together.
Oh, no, I don't. I mean, I love you, but I once took a workshop from a dear friend about qualitative research, and she said, Joe, you must promise me you will never do qualitative research, because you just don't have you just can't do it. And yes, Elfrida, I promise I will never do qualitative research. So I've sworn. And she's gone to that great research lab in the sky. So I cannot, but I appreciate the offer, but no, I promised Elfrida I can't. So.
That's my research. Sorry.
So if you had asked this question, there was a question in there somewhere. If you'd asked us that question 25 years ago, the answer would have been books and journal articles. And it's not anymore. Now, there are places where it is, but if you're a humanist, you publish books. If you're a social scientist, you publish journal articles. If you're an artist, you paint. If you're a musician, you compose, a few other little things along the side. If you're a scientist, you publish journal articles, and that would be the end of it. And if you didn't fit in that, you weren't here. You weren't at this university. You weren't in the academy. Among my checkered past that Ed has referenced, I spent a year as chair of the faculty senate, which means I was the elected leader of the faculty, which is an entirely another story. Anyway, 4,800 of the loveliest people you ever want to meet, all of whom are different. And they do conference papers, they do posters, they write plays, they compose musical works, they choreograph dances. I have a dear colleague in the iSchool who's an indigenous Native North American knowledge scholar. She curates museum exhibits, and her scholarship is not the catalogs, but the curation of museum exhibits using historical, Native American artifacts. And we didn't have the first idea how to evaluate her because none of us knew anything about that. So we all had to learn. And she's been wildly successful. She's been at the National Museum of the American Indian and the Smithsonian. She's been at the Fry. She's been at a bunch of places. And the idea, so among the things that our faculty as a university faculty has done is moved away from the word research and toward the word scholarship. Now it finesses the question of research by just not talking about it anymore. And now we call it scholarship because it embraces so many other things. And I would also mention, we have at least a couple of thousand, 1,000-ish faculty at the university who are teaching faculty, whose primary role is instructional, and they are responsible for scholarship as well. But there is a scholarship of teaching. There is a scholarship of practice. There's lots of ways in which you can engage in the production of original knowledge that don't necessarily involve writing a book, writing a scholarly journal article. A lot of it today, particularly at this institution, is community engaged. It is deeply embedded within communities of practice, geographic communities, ethnic and racial communities, religious communities, et cetera. And the notion of what scholarship is so much broader, and it gets bigger every day. And some people embrace that and love it, and some people don't. And some people think, well, but it wasn't in a top 5 journal. Well, you didn't get one of the top 3 scholarly presses to publish that book. Well, they're slowly making their way to the other side of the fence. But yeah, the notion of what scholarship is and what's accepted as scholarship, and I think this university probably is among the more advanced along this line, is much broader and much more inclusive and much more interesting than it would have been 25 years ago, where we talked about scholarly communication as sort of 2 or 3 forms and venues, and if you don't publish in these 5 journals, you might as well just move on. I mean, we're not like that, or only spottily like that. And also different kinds of communities being investigated, being involved in that research, the results of that research being shared with those communities. The kind of breadth of it is just breathtaking compared to the beginning of my scholarly career, which is all to the good. But yeah, what counts is what we decide is what counts.
What counts, and I do want to say, and it's not just a plug, we have the largest undergraduate research program in the country at the university, and and with a team of people that really guide and steward that work. But again, it goes to the ecosystem of a public research university. We have undergraduate students that are in the presence of graduate students that are in the presence of faculty doing work together. So you've got an ecosystem and an opportunity here. And I would also argue that our students wouldn't be here if they didn't come from a place of deep curiosity and really, really interesting stories. Also, this is what holistic admissions does. It looks for those of you who have a story to tell and you're curious about stuff. You may not think of yourself as a researcher, but you have a story, and it starts with the quality of the question. What are you passionate about? And you're living with that question. I was talking to a student who was from Southeast Seattle, and I'm asking about their research, and he said, "Well, I don't do much research." And I did a Howie Becker. Where are you from? Well, my family came here from Vietnam. How long ago? Well, my parents came here about 20, 30 years ago. Do you know what they brought with them? Well, I don't know. They brought some stuff, but why don't you go back and you actually see and ask your mother what they brought with them from Vietnam when they moved here? And those are art. Why don't you ask some questions about how they got here and why they came here? And why don't you start to inquire and see if you can take artifacts that you have in your home and see if you can take a look at them and ask what stories there are about them. All of you have something, and here again, what's fascinating and amazing about this place, everything that you can imagine and think of is a potential opportunity to actually be thinking about inquiry, even if it's yourself and where you come from and how you got here and the artifacts that you brought with you, or scientific inquiry, or all kinds of things. But it's a matter of being here and being present and being fully conscious of being here and asking good questions and then asking what's the appropriate methodology to be able to think about and get to some understanding of what it means to really experience this question well. So we create the opportunity for students to be mentored into research. And I say it over and over again, my favorite part of seeing students present their research, they've been mentored by faculty, but what they do is they sort of get there and they put up their posters and they start with the statement, my research, and I just start laughing right away because it's their research, not their faculty. They don't, nobody starts with, David Baker's research is about, they start with my research. And I know they've been working in David Baker's lab, but they start with my research. And I just think, and I just want to applaud at that point, but they're like, I haven't said anything. It's like, you said my research.
Yeah.
So keep going, just keep going.
And the keyword, I mean, there were many keywords in there. Inquiry. If you're curious, if you wonder, if you get frustrated, if you want to know why, if you want to know how, if you want to know why not, why is the world the way it is? Why is the world not the way it is? How do we get it to the way we want it to be? How did it get this way? Who made these decisions? How did those decisions get made? If those are the things that are on your mind, which they might well be, just as a guess, that's inquiry. That's scholarship. That's research. That's investigation. That's what you're here for. That's your job. And do it well and right.
Great. Yeah, the notion of what research is absolutely expanding. My research position for the past couple months has been just looking at thousands of tweets.
Oh,
And
dear
so,
God.
yeah,
Oh, you poor thing.
yeah, that's not going on social media, it's ethnography. And so I think that like, yeah, accepting that,
Even so.
yeah, that, you know, just watching and listening, those are forms of research as well. Now that we've established that those things count as research, could you guys kind of give us an example of maybe a recent project you've been involved in or your favorite project, especially one maybe where students had a role in it as well?
Go.
Are you sure? All right. This is the hard one because I have to think about my favorite. Well, maybe let's say I don't pick favorites. But there have been 1, 2, 3, 4 recent ones. No, right? Something like that. I know there's a bunch of you in here who have been part of those. So we'll walk back. I think actually I will pick one favorite. Sorry. And this was a project for UNESCO. We were asked to do basically what we were just doing is a literature review, which is, you know, you're just kind of looking to see what information is already out there from other people. But then we decided to add on a series of focus groups and interviews. And what we were looking at is the issue of violence in schools, violence on the way to school, violence on the way home from school, against learners with disabilities, and kind of what do we know about it? What information is out there? And this is myself and a colleague who is in LSJ in Disability Studies and JASIS. We had a team of students working with us, which included a number of students with disabilities, and we had them run the focus groups. Because at the end of the day, my view was, look, I'm a learner, but I'm not young. And so it doesn't really, I think we need to have this be led by young people who are in school, and talking to each other about their circumstances and whatever they want to talk about. And so we had a group here. We ran a series of interviews here at the U, and we did a group in South Africa. There was another group in Nigeria, Ghana. There was a bunch in China, Hong Kong, and I believe there was at least one in maybe Portugal, if I'm remembering this right. It's been a few years. And it turned into such I loved it because the client loved it. They loved the way that we had done it. They loved that additional something that the students brought to it, that having young people talking to each other made a difference in the stories we got. I mean, I love talking to people, but I'm not the right person to be talking about this. And so we got different stories, I think because of who was asking. And then we had the students do the presentations. So one of the students who was part of the team presented to UNESCO, put on a global panel, and she was part of the panel. Just like everybody, just as the same way everybody else was, talking about her experience on the team, what it felt like to her as a young woman with a disability to be talking about this, her own experiences and so on. And that has informed UNESCO's approach and advocacy around what it means to be a whole school, the whole school environment, and what it takes for a safe and nurturing environment for all learners of every age. And so I think that I have to say I was really pretty special. I have had lots of other fabulous projects with students here, but that probably was one of my favorites.
I do have a favorite. So there. So Ed was kind enough to point this out. For the last number of years, I've done a podcast series for a popular audience called Documents That Change the World. Subscribe at your favorite podcast hub, by the way. My husband is here and is going to, and who's also my publicist, who's going to insist I say that. Which started as a student project. So many years ago, a master's student said, hey, what do you want to do? And I need to do a end of degree project, and we wound up doing this thing. I did the Gregorian calendar. He did the John Snow cholera map. Don't die of cholera. There are many better ways to go than dying of cholera. Anyway, so I've been doing this for several years, and I've had a number of students work on episodes with me. In the last few weeks, 2 honor students, Eliana Thane. Eliana, are you here? I thought you might show up. Did one on the world's oldest complaint letter. Sumerian cuneiform. There's also a subreddit apparently called Really Shitty Copper for this copper merchant who people kept sending him complaint letters in cuneiform, and he kept them. And 3,000 years later, we still have them, which is, who keeps complaint letters even in cuneiform? And Diego Lycia is just this close to finishing an episode on the Quipu, which is the ancient Incan writing system, we think, but because there's no key to it, we can't read it. So there's an entire cultural repository of knowledge about the Inca that is inaccessible to us because we don't know how to read. It's knotted strings and fibers, and it's highly structured, and we know it's a recording instrument, but we have no idea what it means. And many people haven't studied it because it's a part of the world, South America, that people don't study because people would rather study Egypt and China and Rome. Draw your own lessons from those. So I've been doing this for a long time. One of my favorite episodes, one I did on my own, is the golden records on the Voyager spacecraft. So some of you may know that the Voyager spacecraft were launched in the 70s to study the outer planets. And Carl Sagan, God bless him, an intellectual hero, physicist, popularizer, physicist popularizer, spoke to a general audience. I want to speak to a general audience. And the reason I do a podcast series is this is every conversation I have ever had with somebody when I meet him at a dinner party or something. What do you do? Oh, I teach at the University of Washington. Really? What do you do? I'm in the information school. Oh, they got nothing. Right. They got, oh, is that technology? No. Is that communication? No. Is that, we'll just play the game for a little while and then I'll figure it out. Yeah, people don't know what we do. So it's my job to fix that. So this series is meant to help people see that information objects and forms have stories behind them. So middle 70s, they're going to send these probes out to study the outer planets. And Carl Sagan gets this idea like, we should stick record albums on the side of these things just in case they're ever found. Like they're going to be found. If you've ever seen the first Star Trek movie, you know how this ends. But so there are discs. You all know like retro vinyl discs and stuff, right? So these are made out of uranium and so that they can be detected by radioactive sensors. They're never going to be found. There's voice, there's music, there's pictures, there's Chuck Berry is on this thing. The Beatles record label wouldn't let them put a song on there. So there's no Beatles on there, which is a darn shame. There's Vivaldi because Vivaldi was dead. The story those records tell is we have to tell our story. Those things are going to outlive us. They've long since passed over the heliopause, which is the outer extent of the solar system. So they are the only human constructs that have left the solar system. They're going to outlive us as a species. Our star will explode and die, and those things will still be out there. Those will be the last things left of human society. And they are our stories and songs. And there's a recording of a heartbeat and laughter. And that's going to be what's left of us, is this disc with instructions on how to build a player for the disc, because it's aliens, right? Which is never going to happen. But when our star goes nova, we will still be out there. Some fraction of us will still be out there in the form of information. That's the story.
I'll be brief.
Stop that.
I'm gonna. Oh, did you just challenge me? I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to shamelessly name drop. You said Carl Sagan. So I'm with a group of people in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago who do research for the Dalai Lama. You pushed me and I had to go there.
All right,
it is actually a group that is convened by the Dalai Lama. Right? First generation God, I'm sitting in a room with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. This is a true story. And so, because he's convened this group for the last 35 years to actually think about the science of compassion. So he's surrounded himself with a group of cognitive scientists and neuroscientists to actually ask the question, can compassion be taught? What's the science of this? How do we know it can be taught to kids? So he surrounded himself with neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, and geneticists to pose this question for the last 20, 30 years. It's bringing Tibetan wisdom into a conversation with Western science. So we're convening to talk about the future of this contemplative research and how do we know and how do we move this work forward. And so the cognitive scientists are going on and on and on about what they know and about the research and about evidence. And then a guy stands up and he's a philosopher from Michigan. And he says, you've left out the phenomenologists. And you're all putting questions on the table, but Husserl and Heidegger are going to put the table on top with a question. Let's reframe this whole thing. And they kind of blew the room up. And then a woman who's sitting in a room, Yuri Seligman from Berkeley, native, she said, you are all talking about your bodies of research, and you're talking about the future of the research. And she said something really powerful. I come from an oral tradition. And if I were to take any of your work, your research, and I were to replicate it without referencing you, you would call it plagiarism and I'd be fired. But everything you just talked about comes from my oral tradition, and you have not referenced this in a moment. And she did something that I've never seen. She actually dropped the mic. She dropped the mic. And so, and in the rooms, maybe one or two, you might know this reference, John Kabat-Zinn leads us all into meditation after she dropped the mic. And so we're sitting in a room, and we sat quietly for an hour and a half because you really brought the room to silence. We've got this project where we're actually thinking about the science and research of compassion and thinking about the different methodologies that should be brought to bear to think about, can we create a more compassionate society? Can we heal trauma? Can we stop war at a global scale? So there are scholars around the world that are actually sitting together saying, what do we deal with the current predicament of environmental crisis, of trauma in the world, of war? And there's serious conversations and bringing the best methodologies we can bring into the conversation with the Dalai Lama. It's interesting.
First of all, you're in more interesting rooms than I am. So I'm just kind of in awe of the fact that you had a mic drop in front of the Dalai Lama. Yeah, all right, I'll tell the story really fast. So among the things I teach in one of my classes, including in spring quarter, is we talk about orality and what oral cultures were like. And there was a recent archaeological study of an oral tradition in Tasmania, in Aboriginal communities in Tasmania. And apparently there is an oral story among Tasmanian Aboriginal peoples that has survived largely intact for somewhere between 12 and 14,000 years. And this is an article that brings together a paleo astronomer, so people who study the history of astronomy, archaeologists, a couple of other disciplines, deeply interdisciplinary study, absolutely fascinating, that demonstrates with historical star charts and other kinds of, phenomena that this story, which references things in the sky, et cetera, is more or less correct and unchanged for 12 or 14,000 years. Okay, so we talked about this article. This came up in my honors class last year. This is what an honors student does. So we're having this conversation like, yeah, isn't that interesting? And a hand goes up on the side and is like, why did anybody feel like they had to prove that? Why did we have to go through astrobiology? Paleoastronomy? Why didn't we just believe them? Like, that's an even better question. Let's talk about that for a little while. So if you take my class in the spring, we'll talk about something else. But yeah, that's that. See, there's always another question. There's always another question.
All right, I'm gonna cut in here. The media list is getting too long. It's too long. So we've kind of talked about, the different ways that students have supplemented your research projects. But I'm sure a lot of people here are wondering, how do you get involved in that research? How have you taken on students into your projects? What is the specific role that students have? If, any of you are welcome to respond to that.
Okay. I mean, I love having students as part of my projects, as basically everybody I've had in class knows. And that is usually how this happens, is somebody comes up to me after and is like, oh, I mean, Jay is a perfect example of this, where we were in Peru this summer, and one of the people that we were speaking with there had a really interesting story that they wanted somebody to follow up on. And so I threw it out into the group. Jaya was amazing enough to say, hey, I'll do that. And now we're sort of working slowly but surely towards kind of creating maybe this multicultural team that's going to look at indigenous persons, human rights defenders in the Amazon, and see what kind of legal solutions there are out there for them, and what kind of barriers they're facing, and so on. And so it kind of tends to happen a little bit organically for, in terms when students are taking my classes. I will say I do that on the side as a volunteer. And I wish there were more opportunities to do it in the context of a more structured arrangement, so that we could actually spend the time, because they're doing it as volunteers too. And so we're all kind of trying to fit it around finals and grading and all this other kind of thing. And I wish there were more. I'm sure there are. What I can say is, when it happens for me, we do it we kind of find pockets of time where we can make it work. Taylor's another one who worked on a project winter spring that sort of, went longer than we thought, took a lot of time, but ultimately ended up in a trip to New York. And so it's just one of those things. So I would like to be able to say, yes, this is amazing, and maybe it is. There's possibilities, but I would like to hear more from others.
If you'll Google and go to the office, go to the Undergraduate Academic Affairs website, and you'll find the Office of Undergraduate Research there. And again, a tribute to my colleagues who do this as well as anybody in the country. And so just take a look at the website and reach out to colleagues there, and they can give you advice and connect you with faculty or with graduate students that will connect you to the work. But take a look, Undergraduate Academic Affairs, and look up Office of Undergraduate Research.
We want you to do research, and we want to do research with you. This is an unhelpful question. Can I do research with you? Here's a more help. So the question, because I get this all the time, what I ask students is, what do you want to get? What do you want to learn? Do you want to learn about something? Do you want to learn a methodology? Do you want to get connection to a community? Do you want to, what do you want out of this? Because there's lots of different things you can get out of a research project. If you scan around I go to the undergraduate research fair in the spring, and I look at the posters. I don't even understand the titles, right? And they're all so happy, and they give it their little speech. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but yeah, you, right? thinking a little bit, just a tiny bit about what you want out of this, other than I did research, which is fine. But having some thought about, you take a class with somebody and you get fascinated by their work and you want to dig into that work. Or you run across a field you don't know very much about and they use a method that you're not familiar with that you find intriguing, and I want to be a better data analyst. I want to be a better interviewer. I want to be a better surveyor. I want to be a better artist. I want to be a better whatever. If there's and Ed's right about the undergraduate research office, but even in engaging with individual faculty, most of whom are delighted to hear from you. But it's more helpful if there's a second part of the sentence. Like, I would like to know more about human rights. I would like to know more about how we can make communities safer from a public health perspective. I would like to know more about how to be a more effective interviewer. Have I got a thing for you? That's a better entree. So giving it that extra 15 minutes of investigation on their website or the lab or center or whatever they have, and then, yeah, okay, that, Sometimes there's actual projects there, like, we are currently looking for students to do this. But often it's, you work with young people and how they interact with technology. I've always wondered, like, what happens in middle school that the boys go on to do STEM stuff and the girls don't? Or, the coding classes are way more boys than girls after middle school. There's a research question. Yeah, just that extra little bit makes a much more productive conversation with faculty.
Absolutely. And you guys brought something up that I think a lot of students forget, is that their professors are also often researchers and engaged in research. Surprise, surprise. And so whenever you're taking a class that you think is really cool, it's totally acceptable to express interest in the work that the professor is doing. That's how I got my current research position, was just taking a class and really enjoying the material, enjoying the professor, and asking if I could support her in any of her work. And I have been for a year now. And so just, don't be afraid to ask, seeking out professors that are doing work that you're interested in. Cool. So we've kind of gotten into topic of research. Let's talk now about kind of who or what is the public in public research universities. So kind of getting into the semantics of it. Is the public the students? Is the public civil society? A lot of people were also wondering in the survey, kind of, where does research go? Where are the findings being disseminated? And so let's kind of get into that a little bit.
I'll give a quick response. I'm a professor in the College of Education, so I feel personally obligated. I mean, there was a point at which I realized I could have gotten tenure by not. I'm going to say this with clarity. There was a point at which I realized I could have gotten tenure and never stepped into a public school in Seattle. I could have written theoretical pieces. I could have written, and the calls I was getting from colleagues around the city and around the state about issues and crises in public education compelled me to try to make sense of my work in conversation with the public in relation to the students I was serving and that we are serving. So I feel like because of the nature of my work, have a responsibility, and this is my thinking, a responsibility to make sense to our public locally. And again, here's a place where you can't get tenure without speaking to a national, if not a global audience. And I will say, the university during the pandemic did some really important work, translating research into sense-making. That was really pretty powerful. And I'll end there. There's a lot we can say about that, but we're sitting in a room together in part because of some really important work that our university did.
So the question of the public is really interesting because it's all the things you mentioned and besides. It's the taxpayers of the state of Washington. It's the federal government. We're the second largest recipient of federal research money among public institutions, I think. So the federal government is a huge contributor to the research enterprise of this university, not to mention the health science enterprise. The people is the communities we work with, the students we teach, our colleagues in research institutions, other research institutions. Ed's absolutely right. Megan's talked a lot about this. I'm going to make just one quick plea for basic research. The kind of research that doesn't have practical application, the kind of research that doesn't have a particular end in mind or a particular goal in mind. I mean, Ed brought up the pandemic stuff. So much basic fundamental microbiological and virological, I can't say that word at 8 o'clock, virological work had gone on to enable the kind of stuff that went on, that, you know, people were so taken up by, we need a vaccine, we need we need treatments, we need testing, we need all of that applied stuff, which was absolutely critical and was based on decades of fundamental basic research that never had a goal in mind. And it gets overlooked and it gets taken for granted. And I think, and it often happens in the sciences, but it happens in other places as well. And there are other people who are sort of laboring away in libraries and archives and studios and concert halls and other kinds of places, working on little things that might never see the light of day for 50 years. And then somebody finds it. And then it can be transformative. So yes, all the things we've talked about, yes, the translation into the public good, yes, all of that. And sometimes it's just worth doing because it's worth doing. And because it satisfies the itch, satisfies your curiosity. Like, I've always wondered, and I kind of want to know. And I'll write it down, and I'll publish it, and I'll put it somewhere, and who knows? Maybe someday somebody will find it. And someday somebody does, and some days nobody does. But it's still worth doing.
Absolutely. Not to cut you off,
Okay.
Megan. Yes, so sorry. We are approaching the end, and so I'm going to ask you all to kind of take a second to reflect on our conversation, and if you could just give like a 1-minute closing remark, any big takeaways, things that you all are going to walk away with, or what you want the audience to walk away with tonight.
Stephanie said it at the beginning when we walked in the door, which was just simply the importance of convening at this moment and retooling and thinking deeply about the predicament that we're in now, but being hopeful about the work that we can do together and why we do it together, because our purpose is as public and as significant and morally significant as perhaps it's ever been in my lifetime. So the convening and the work that we have to do and be inspired, I'm taking a deep breath and being inspired to do more.
I'll go. I have to say, not to make this about me, but I am actually really grateful to have been invited today because I feel like I occupy a very weird place on campus. I'm a student. I don't look like a student, but I am a student, and I'm just kind of in this. I don't belong at the law school really, but nobody else kind of wants me much most of the time either. So I have to say, it's been such a delight and such a pleasure to be part of the honors community. You guys I always recommend it to all of my friends who have kids the same age as you guys. I went to a very tiny little liberal arts college. And what I was going to say earlier, it was walled off. It was pretty walls. They were really pretty low stone walls and everything, but we were totally walled off from our community. And I love the fact that this campus is so open and public. You can take your dog for a walk. It's insane. You can get your wedding pictures taken anywhere. I mean, it's crazy, right? And there is that, but still, I think it's really great. But I also love the fact that there's this lovely sort of feeling of liberal arts space, like this wonderful community in honors. And so I'm so grateful to be part of it.
I am equally grateful to be part of this and to be part of honors. Stephanie knows, everybody knows how much I value my participation in the honors program. I brought a prop, which nobody can see. So you're gonna have to take my word for it. This is a button. You wear it like this. At the 1939 World's Fair in New York City, on the eve of war, literally on the eve of war. War broke out at the very end of the 1939 World's Fair. General Motors had this exhibit called Futurama that showed the America of 1960, which, curiously enough, featured multi-lane highways with lots of cars, General Motors, and high-rise buildings and planned communities, and everything was perfect and everything had been solved. And right, it was this whole like late 30s, community planning kind of thing. If you went to that exhibit You came out and they gave you a button to wear around the fairgrounds. And the button says, I have seen the future, which I do every day, which is the privilege of being part of a public research university with people who actually give a shit, who want to make the world a better place, who want to live in a world that's better, who want to work and advocate and study and make the world a better place. So I have seen the future. I am seeing the future. And I am very, very proud to be a part of it.
It's difficult to follow that one. You set the bar a little too high. You had to prop on everything. Yeah, I'd like to echo all those things. I think it's been a very weird past week. I'm sure we can all agree on that. And it's just really nice to be in community with all of you, kind of talking about these big things. I think these conversations are very impactful in and of themselves. And so I thank all of you for coming, being here, especially in person.